I'd like to welcome you to our breakout session, Water Conservation Efforts of Irrigation Companies in the Great Salt Lake Basin. Now I'd like to introduce our speaker. Bailey is a graduate student at Utah State University. So I'll turn the time over to Bailey.
Yes, thank you so much. We are, thank you. We're almost at the end, I can feel it. So thank you so much for coming to my talk today, I really appreciate it. So like it was introduced, my name is Bailey Holdaway. I'm a master's student at Utah State University, working with Dr. Courtney Flint, who's here. And this is just part of my master's research thesis on water conservation efforts of irrigation companies in the Great Salt Lake Basin. So let's just dive into it. So as many of us are probably aware, as we are all here at the symposium, the Western US is experiencing high levels of desiccation. This means we're drying out, we're getting drier, folks. We have increasing temperatures, decreasing precipitation, and it's causing some side effects, let's just say that. Here in Utah, we have an increasing population like many places in the Western US, and we're also faced with complicated geographical problems like a lot of the Intermountain West. This in combination makes water management really difficult. We wouldn't have symposiums like these if water management was easy to kind of figure out and attend to. There's a lot of great kind of large-scale, broad policy work that's being done, but there's also kind of an untapped resource of on-the-ground, day-to-day water management, which is also known as local water management organizations, which I'll be getting into soon. Unfortunately, a lot of this on-the-ground work is very constrained for a lot of these entities. They face a lot of barriers, a lot of kind of blockades to what work they're doing. But the work they're doing is important nonetheless. So let's kind of dive into that kind of complication of why is water management so difficult here in the Western US? First, water has limits. There's only so much water available to us that we have access to, that we can consume, everything like that. Water is limited. The second kind of aspect of being a wicked problem is that on-the-ground knowledge of water management is not well integrated into academic knowledges, and vice versa. Academic knowledges is not necessarily brought to and digestible for on-the-ground knowledge. There's kind of a gap there between knowledges and experiences. The last two are kind of related, but there's some geosocio-political boundaries of water management that create difficulties for water management. A lot of people have a lot of infrastructure. There's a lot of water being managed, but there's only so many people, there's only so many dollars that can go around to manage water, and it creates a lot of complicated issues. And similarly, collaboration is a challenge. There's only so many hours in the day for people to kind of work together in water management. So this is a conceptual diagram that I put together of this local water management organization's kind of landscape here in the Great Salt Lake Basin. You can see that there's a lot of overlaps, there's a lot of complexities here. And I'm sure there are some that maybe I'm missing even. But today I'll be focusing here on this irrigation company's aspect side of things. Obviously, I acknowledge that the rest of these boxes are equally as important. They all have a role to play, but we only have 20 minutes to talk about this. So I'm gonna focus on irrigation companies for today. So with that in mind, I kind of wanted to just outline the research questions that I'm kind of thinking about and hope to answer today are, what efforts are irrigation companies taking towards water conservation? What enables or constrains irrigation companies and their ability to participate in water conservation? And then what is the perspective of irrigation companies as it pertains to the current landscape of water conservation conversations? All right. So a little bit of context. I'm sure we're all very aware of what the Great Salt Lake Basin is. I do want to just kind of acknowledge the inclusion of the Strawberry Basin. We feel it's hydrologically important to the Great Salt Lake Basin because of the Central Utah Water Project. I will just kind of caveat here that I did not do any interviews in the Strawberry Basin, so I can't actually speak to anything going on there today, but I do acknowledge that they are an important kind of component of the basin. Looking a little bit further into the breakdown of irrigation companies within the basin. So this map here shows irrigation companies grouped by size categories. So this goes from small companies who have very, very limited water right allocations, which is less than 1 cubic feet per second, all the way up to these very large companies that have over 100 cubic feet per second. You can see that there's quite a few in those 3 central basins of Bear, Weber, and Jordan. There's a couple in the West Desert and a couple in Strawberry. But really, we're kind of talking about that Wasatch Front, that kind of central area there. Another kind of caveat to what I'm working on here, the Utah Division of Water Resources has a list of irrigation companies in the state, which was a great kind of find for me. Unfortunately, it has not been updated since 2014, but it is the most up-to-date list that there is. But this does mean that there are some issues with the data, or just some inconsistencies and a little bit of caveats that I need to address. This is how many companies that I was not able to find water rights data for. There's quite a few. There's a couple different reasons that I think are behind this. One, companies just don't want to manage water anymore. It's kind of too difficult. They've sold their land, they sell their water rights, and they just kind of dissolve as a company altogether. The second is water companies or irrigation companies often get absorbed into other entities, into municipalities, into conservation districts, into another entity like an irrigation company. And so then they kind of just fade away. They're still technically around, but in a different form, and they've kind of been absorbed. And so there's some inconsistencies there. And then I'm sure there are just some data flaws. I love the Division of Water Resources, but they are busy people, and so I'm sure some have just kind of gotten lost along the way. So I just want to caveat that everything I'm talking about today will just be from the perspective of the companies that did have data. The ones that did not have data, I cannot really speak to. They are just kind of a black box for me to address at some later date. So kind of looking at this landscape a little bit more, this pie chart on the left here shows the makeup of water rights allocation. So all the companies that I did find water rights data for, I compiled it, and I got a sense of, okay, what is the kind of, who has what water rights, things like that. And so I think we can kind of see an interesting relationship that will come up later in this talk. But there's some nuances of who is holding the water rights and who is on the landscape. These very large companies take up a majority of the water rights within the Great Salt Lake Basin, but they are a small minority of the companies that are present in the landscape. Those small to large companies dominate the landscape as far as numbers, but as far as water rights allocation go, they have less than a quarter of the total water rights. So this isn't to try to put any blame on anyone, it's just want to kind of highlight that there's going to be nuances to this kind of conversation of conservation of water and who is able to kind of participate, who even has the water to participate in conservation, things like that. So quickly want to go into my methods because I'm a master's student and I got to talk about my methods. So I did semi-structured interviews with 18 companies across the Great Salt Lake Basin. These were semi-structured interviews. These are not surveys. These are really more conversations where I went into people's homes, went to a coffee shop with someone from the company and had an interview. I tried to get a good representation across company sizes as well as across basins in the Great Salt Lake Basin. These interviews lasted 30 to 90 minutes. We recorded them, I transcribed them, and I'm currently working on coding them and pulling out themes, which I will be talking about soon. So who was I able to talk to? This map shows all the companies that I was able to interview. So this is 18 across the entire Great Salt Lake Basin. Mainly in those 3 central basins. I got 1 in the West Desert, which was a proud accomplishment. Did not get any in the Strawberry, but maybe one day I'll be able to snag someone. So I want to kind of go through 5 findings that I want to kind of discuss a little bit more. These are what I'm going to go through, but I do want to acknowledge that I'll be talking about quotes because I think what these irrigation companies are saying, these representatives are saying, they really speak for themselves. They have the power in their own words, so I want to share what they said directly. And second, a lot of these quotes might seem a little bit like they have the wrong idea or that they maybe have something wrong. And that is because they might. A lot of these companies have been in this landscape of prior appropriation and beneficial use, and water conservation and water management has been kind of stuck in one way for many years. Things have been changing. There's been integration of water leasing, specifically that theme one I'm going to talk about. Things are changing, but that doesn't necessarily mean that attitudes and actions are going to change immediately. Things are going to slowly take time, and behaviors are going to take time to change. So I just want to acknowledge that some of these might be like, I don't know if that's how water leasing works, and I don't know if it is. I think it But it's important to acknowledge that these are the perspectives of these companies. So let's dive into this first theme. All right, I got a lot of quotes here because I really think they're powerful. So this is from a representative of a very large company in the Bear River Basin. And they say, some of the things that we worry about is although leasing to the Great Salt Lake has some potentially good benefits financially to the company, it sends the message that we don't need the water. And in reality, it's more like we're willing to rent you our extra, but in early bottom of the drought, we do need that water. And so there's worry is that we become more creative with water and show that efficiency gains and things like that, the people will assume that we don't need the water and they'll try to take it through force. You know, that would be an extreme breach of trust. I certainly hope that doesn't happen. So again, is that how water leasing actually works in the state? Would water be taken through force? I doubt that would happen. But that doesn't necessarily sway the feelings of these companies. They're still scared. They're still kind of cautious about participating in water leasing. And so I think there's kind of a gap there between reality for these companies and then the reality of water leasing and water management as far as the state goes, or water management policies. A similar kind of perspective here is from a representative of a small company in the Weber River Basin. They say, well, the legislature talks about all these things that they're going to do if I conserve water, that we could lease our water. Our big concern right now is you have to use your water right or lose it. And we have no way to use it because we put in a pipe to conserve water. So we feel like we're being penalized for doing what's right. So again, kind of talking about how they're worried that their water rights are going to be taken away because they're conserving water. Again, not necessarily the way things might actually be, but this is their perspective. This is their reality. Kind of going a little bit more in the positive direction when it comes to water leasing. This is from a mid-sized company in the Bear River Basin, and their representative said, if they can get it figured out, it doesn't seem like to me like they can get it figured out. They've been talking about it for a number of years, and they're no closer to it now than they ever have been. All they do is talk. I've got excess shares on this piece of ground. I would love to be able to lease my excess shares waters to somebody, but gosh, I wonder if it's just a pipe dream. So again, they're interested in water leasing and these kind of efforts, but they're a little bit apprehensive about how the actual conversation would go, how it actually would be in reality for them. The last quote I want to share with this kind of theme of water leasing is from a very large company in the Jordan River Basin. And they said, I think one of the best things that happened was the ability for companies to assign their water to the Great Salt Lake. So if I'm not using something and I have extra, I can do a temporary change application and send to the lake. That's great. Or else, I don't want to lose it and then I'm trying to find somebody else to utilize it. And I think sometimes you don't want to encourage people to use more. And so what do you do with anything that's saved? And I think that was a smart decision that the state did. So again, this one is a little bit closer to what water leasing is in reality. And so I think it kind of shows that there's a range of perspectives when it comes to water leasing. Some are a little bit more stuck in their ways. They're a little bit more scared to participate. And there's some that are ready to kind of go, ready to lease their water. The next four themes, I'm going to go a lot quicker, I promise. There were just so many quotes for that first one that I had to share. So this theme 2 is those in agriculture are doing the most. So this is from a small company in the Bear River Basin, and their representative said, and here's something that's a hard pill to swallow, but it needs to be said. So our water rights have not changed. They have not expanded since they were established. And some of the old rights on the river were established prior to 1870. The reservoir was established in about 1920. So our water rights have not expanded in all that time. And in fact, they have gone down because some of these rights have been sold for other uses. And so in my view, we are not the problem. And so again, they really view that they're not using any more water than they ever have been. They're using less than they probably have historically. And they feel it's unfair, the kind of blame that they're receiving. This is from a mid-sized company in the Bear River Basin, and the representatives here said, the farmers here, for the most part, the farmers here are conservative with their water. They've used it wisely, and they know that, hey, some years we're going to be short, and other years maybe we'll be all right. So we have to take that into account. And so they're conservative with the water that they plan on using for their crops. I think they do a good job. The farmers do a good job. I think this irrigation company works closely with the farmers to make that all work and happen, and with the citizens who have shares in the irrigation water. I think for the most part, people realize that, hey, water is water, and sometimes we don't have it. So really talking about how farmers are really trying their best. They know that if they overwater, they're not going to have water. It'll ruin their crops, and they know what to do with their water. They're being smart. They're being conservative. This third theme is conservation is a bonus to other efforts. So this is from a very large company in the Bear River Basin, and their representative said, well, I'm optimistically looking forward to pressurizing the system. I think that we could not only through the efficiency, but I think we could raise better crops under sprinkling systems. Also contributing back to the fish habitat? Absolutely. Do we have some water that can help maintain that? You bet. So again, kind of just talking about these compounding efforts that are happening through the company's conservation efforts. This is from a representative of a large company in the Weber River Basin, and they said, we've updated or upgraded quite a bit of it over since I started doing it in 2016. But at one point I did a study. We have over 400 miles of pipe in the ground, and I don't know how many feet we're doing a year of it, but it's quite a bit. We're just starting to get rid of our leaks, getting rid of our seepage, starting to save more water. And we've noticed a benefit. Our own crews are not out as much at night fixing leaks, or we're not having to shut off as big areas. We're saving more water upstream in the reservoir. So again, talking about those compounding efforts, fixing leaks, improving employee well-being, while they're also saving water in the reservoir, and that's important to them. The next theme is goals to be innovators in water management and conservation. So this is from a very large company in the Bear River Basin, and they say, I mean, we're really looking forward to changing our system into cutting edge, world class. We intend by the end of the decade to be an example of what you could be. Whereas before this, we were truly a pioneer-esque system. Our system was really well built. And part of the problem is that when someone did it right the first time, there's not as much improvements to do when you're being ranked against other companies that their systems weren't put as well together. We already have higher water saving rates and those kinds of things. So we're really looking forward to being an example of what to do. This company, a large company in the Jordan River Basin, their representative said, well, I think it first has to start with the customers and the technology that they can use. They use all the water and they can save all the water. I mean, it really is up to them. And so like I said, these smart meters, it allows them to get leak alerts, for example, to their phones. Allows them to track daily and minute usage, have customer portals. That helps a lot. And it helps us as a company keep track too, because we can notify the customers and say, hey, look, something's happened on your system and there's a leak, and people are able to fix them much quicker. So kind of talking about putting the role of conservation in the hands of their shareholders and their customers, making them empowered to be able to conserve water and take action on their own water. The last theme is companies want to do more, but they're encountering some barriers and it's making their work more difficult when it comes to conservation. So a representative from a large company in the Jordan River Basin, they said, well, yeah, we want to keep using this water. And I think that's the key to these small irrigation companies. If you keep using it, you can keep the rights. So it's kind of a catch-22, as we want to use enough that we can maintain it, but we don't want to be looked at as, well, you're wasting water. It's just running down the street, nobody's getting any benefit from it. Since I've taken over my position there, I'm trying to figure out a way to balance it, keep it there, and keeping our shares, but also use it efficiently and not waste water. So kind of going back to that theme on some of those companies had on water leasing, just kind of being scared about, it's hard to balance wanting to conserve water while also maintaining the right, while also putting it to a good use. It's just kind of a real dichotomy of needs that are happening with water conservation. This is from a very large company in the Weber River Basin, and I just think this one is a very interesting quote. They say, they're all save this, save that, let's think of now. And I think they're worrying about taking care of the people now versus thinking of the next generation down the road. There's no water. I'm sorry, you can't produce more water. Mother Nature will. And the decision they're making, the biggest one, is the secondary meter. It's a rough program to be putting on these individual companies. They can't afford it. Everyone's getting grants. Everyone's getting loans. It's a very expensive program, and for what when no one knows? No one knows the end result. They say it's going to save water, but no one really abuses water like they think they do. And I think this kind of goes back to the idea that I was mentioning of, I'm pretty sure that the state kind of knew what the end result was of metering secondary water. They have a kind of plan. They know that it'll help them kind of know what's in the system and things like that. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it translates to these companies, that they necessarily understand why are they being forced to kind of meter every drop of water? Why is the burden being put on these companies? So that both of them have these perspectives, and there's not a good connect. The gap is not being bridged between these two entities of water policy and water action and management. So what does all this mean? I feel like irrigation companies care about water conservation. Something that Commissioner Steed said yesterday, his 3 kind of tenets were conserve, dedicate, and deliver. I think irrigation companies, for the most part, really are doing a lot of the conserving of water. They really care about it. Some are a little bit falling behind, but they're really trying to get there. They're really passionate about water conservation. They know if there's no water, then there's no water for them to use. It's their livelihood. But I think there's a little bit of disconnect of going from that stage of conservation to that stage of dedicating and delivering the water to other uses like the Great Salt Lake. So I think there needs to be a little bit more kind of approach from the kind of academic side of things, the agency side of things, to kind of come to these irrigation companies and say, what do you need to get this conserved water, dedicate it to the Great Salt Lake, dedicate it to fisheries, dedicate it to whatever, and deliver it? What's the kind of barriers there? And so like I just mentioned, companies are experiencing barriers to participating in conservation or kind of going to those next steps of dedicating and delivering it. And I think it really emphasizes that there is not a one-size-fits-all approach to this kind of conversation. Going back to this kind of diagram, we can see the nuance kind of emerge looking at those quotes. The companies that hold the most water are not the companies that dominate the landscape in terms of numbers. There's a real nuance and conversation that we need to kind of be having here. And this is not to put blame on any of these larger companies for not doing enough. It's more to just kind of acknowledge that it's going to be a hard kind of road to kind of maneuver and figure out as we're getting drier and figuring things out along the way. It's going to be hard, but I think we can do it. These companies are very excited about conservation. They know it's important. We just need to figure out how to kind of bridge those gaps. And so to kind of end, I want to tell you what we're doing now. So I was able to do some really great interviews. I got a real depth of perspectives from these companies. They were really great to talk to. But we would love to get more of a broad, more of a breadth kind of perspective. So I'm planning to do some surveys with irrigation companies in early 2025. Like I kind of showed that conceptual diagram of the landscape of local water management organizations, we're hoping to kind of hit those other squares, those other tenants. And we recently just completed a survey effort with municipalities in the state, and we're hoping to kind of analyze that and figure out what is the kind of municipal side of water management. What are they doing? What are their priorities? What are their barriers when it comes to water management? And then from there, just kind of evaluate more themes that kind of arise from these interviews, integrate them with the surveys, and then also kind of explore more of that water rights data. Hopefully one day dig into that black box of the missing data from those companies and explore there. So that's really all I have for you. I do want to just say a couple thank yous, specifically to the irrigation companies. I know they're not here right now, but this work is not possible without them. They invite me into their homes, they get coffee with me. They're very honest, they're very transparent, they're very emotional about their water and things like that. And so it really means a lot for them to allow me to interview them and understand their perspectives. I also want to thank everyone who's helped on the project and the groups that have helped fund this, as well as my amazing advisor, who I would not be here without. And so thank you so much. I would love to take any questions from anyone. Yeah, let me see that.
So one question I had is, with your aspect from the integration company and reaching to municipalities, are you thinking of wanting to touch into any of the bigger agricultural companies within the district and see what their opinions are compared to the companies and the cities?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a lot of the larger agricultural entities that exist in the state are often shareholders within irrigation companies. But there are probably some that just have their own right and are not part of an irrigation company. So I definitely think there is kind of an untapped kind of aspect there that we definitely need to look into. I am planning on doing maybe some interviews with conservation districts and kind of see that perspective. And we're doing those surveys with municipalities, and probably after that we'll do some interviews and try to get that more of the depth there while also achieving that kind of breadth.
Based upon your surveys, what do you think the biggest miscommunication is between government entities like the Division of Water Rights and the irrigation companies? Like, what do you, based upon your knowledge and what's being said to you, do you think is the piece that needs to be addressed the most?
Yeah, I think just off the top of my head, I think aspects of capacity are a big kind of barrier, whether that capacity comes in the form of finances, whether that capacity comes in the form of manpower, whether it comes in time. I think there's a real kind of, these companies are very, their resources are spread thin already, and they don't have a lot of time, they don't have a lot of capacity, and then they're kind of being asked to do more and more from their perspective, and they feel like their capacity is already limited and they're not being given any more. And so I think that's kind of the biggest disconnect between irrigation companies and other sort of entities, that policymakers, agencies, things like that, is that the irrigation companies, at least from their end, they feel like they don't have the capacity to kind of do more, or they're feeling a little too stretched thin with everything. I hope that answers your question.
If I were going to write my legislators about this situation, what would you like me to say to them?
Yeah, I mean, I think really kind of the takeaway is that there's nuance in the conversation. This isn't to give a pass to agriculture to just use whatever water they want, but really it's just to provide more context that this is a difficult conversation for everyone. Everyone is having to make cuts. Everyone's having to have hard times. And the blame going to agriculture or the blame going to one specific entity is not helpful. And so I don't know if that's a really great answer, but just to say that there's nuance and that this is a hard time for everyone. That probably was not great.
Howdy. I was just wondering if, like, over the course of your interviews, if any of the irrigation companies kind of went in depth as to why they maybe are trying to like conserve their full water right, even though they maybe historically have never used it to its full extent. You mentioned that drought was maybe one of those concerns, but like from our end of the Division of Water Rights, we see a lot of times people never exercise their full right, but are really kind of stubborn to holding on to the full amount. So I was wondering if anyone ever like kind of addressed that when you were talking with them.
Yeah, I mean, I can think of a couple interviews where they talk about these water rights are very personal for them. The water rights represent their livelihood. A lot of these irrigation company presidents are people that farm themselves, and they talk about how if they don't have these water rights, it's very personal to them. It's their livelihood themselves. And so I think even if they aren't using the full water right in reality, I think in their mind it's very personal to be taking it away. And I don't know. I think that's something that kind of came to my mind first when you asked that question is these water rights are very tied to their livelihood. It's tied to who they are as a person. It's tied to their community. And making any changes to that is pretty overwhelming, and they want to be able to kind of keep that in their livelihood. I don't know if that answers that.
No, that was great. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for your discussion about irrigation companies.
Yeah.
So my city, Salt Lake City, is much different than Cache Valley.
Yes.
And so I know that, I went to Utah State, and so I didn't even know anything about the irrigation companies, but what Salt Lake City does, and the irrigation companies, Salt Lake City, and we hold a right to the point of diversion, and that then extends to, then it's the irrigation company, and then there's shares that are under that. So did you find any of that in Cache Valley?
Yeah, that's kind of how most irrigation companies works is individuals have shares within the company, and the companies distribute and manage the water. But yes, people have shares. And so whether those people are people in Salt Lake City or whether they're people that own giant farms, it's, yeah.
We got time for one more question.
Hi.
Hi.
Sounded like there was, one of the missing gaps or misunderstandings was the leasing program and how that works. What do you think, or who do you think it falls on to help educate, how that program works? Or is that something we all kind of need to think about?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think it's a little bit of everyone, and I think it is just kind of Utah has had prior appropriation and the kind of same way of managing water and water law for a very long time. It's very ingrained in all of us that use it or lose it. It's really intertwined with everything. And so I think it's going to take some time for people to kind of come to the realization. It's not going to be a quick change. And so I don't know if it falls on anyone in specifically. I'm sure we could all do a little bit more to kind of talk about water leasing and the kind of benefits and how you're not going to be losing your water right. You're just kind of giving the extras away. But yeah, I think it's just going to kind of take some time. It's going to take conversations. It's going to take some discussion. And yeah, it's not going to be overnight. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And then another round of applause for Bailey.
Thank you.